Salem didn't burn its witches. It buried them, under law, under fear, under the weight of guilt so heavy it cracked the soil. But not all of them stayed buried. Some rose in the wind, some hung in the trees, and some still whisper.
Rebecca Nurse was not what you'd call suspicious. She was elderly, pious, a mother of 8, known throughout Salem Village for her kindness, her soft voice, and her unwavering devotion to God. But in 1692, none of that mattered. At 71 years old, she was accused of witchcraft by 3 young girls. Girls said to be suffering fits, visions, seizures, and spectral attacks. And they named Rebecca Nurse. When the accusations reached her, she whispered, "What sin hath God found in me?" Her neighbors signed petitions. Ministers vouched for her. Even the governor hesitated. But the girls screamed in court, said her ghost pinched them, bit them, froze the air. Rebecca stood silent as they convulsed on the floor in front of her. She said no prayers. She begged no mercy. When she was sentenced to die, she said only, "I forgive you not. I know you are in error, and you shall shed tears for this." She was hanged at Gallows Hill on July 19th, 1692. It is said that when her feet stopped twitching, the wind turned violent, that the sky darkened briefly. And then came the curse. They buried her in secret. Her family, forbidden from collecting her body, came at night, dug with bare hands to retrieve her from the execution site. She was laid to rest in silence, away from the churchyard she once served. But the silence didn't last. Within a year, 5 of her accusers died, suddenly, violently, or under conditions no one could explain. One drowned. One vanished in the woods. One convulsed in her sleep and never woke up. None reached adulthood. Judge Samuel Sewall, who signed Nurse's death warrant, later claimed he was tormented by dreams and trembling visitations. He publicly repented in 1697, begging God to remove what he called the shadow of those I wronged. He died alone, shivering in July heat, convinced Rebecca had never forgiven him. Even Gallows Hill itself became cursed ground. Children refused to play near it. Animals avoided it, and one sheriff, who helped oversee the execution, lost his voice the following year, permanently. He died gagging on blood, unable to speak. Locals began to whisper, "She was innocent, and the innocent don't rest. They rise." Some say her spirit still walks the woods, not seeking revenge, but reminding. The gallows were meant to silence her, but she never stopped speaking. Giles Corey was 81 years old when they accused him. A farmer, a blunt man, sometimes cruel, but not stupid. He watched the trials unfold. He saw what happened to the ones who spoke. So when they came for him, when they asked for his plea, he said nothing. By refusing to speak, he avoided trial. Without a plea, they couldn't legally convict or seize his property, so they punished him another way. They laid him in a field, stripped him, placed a board across his chest, and then they began to stack stones, heavy ones, one by one, slowly. Every time they asked for his plea, he gave the same answer: more weight. It took 2 days for him to die. 2 days of crushing, bones splintering, ribs collapsing. 2 days of silence, except for those 2 words: more weight. When he finally died, they said his eyes had bulged from his skull, that his tongue turned black, that the crows circled and screamed, but never landed. Then came the haunting. They buried his body. But not the story. Not long after Giles Corey's death, people began to report strange sightings near the old field. A figure standing by the edge of the stone wall, silent, stooped, unmoving, always watching. But what started as legend became something darker. In 1696, 4 years after his death, Sheriff George Corwin, the man who oversaw Corey's execution, dropped dead in his home, aged 30, a massive internal hemorrhage. Some said he died choking, as if crushed from within, and the pattern didn't stop. Every sheriff in Salem for the next 300 years, those based in the town proper, reported illness, unexplained pressure in the chest, or sudden resignation. More than one died prematurely. All of them suffered. In 1978, Sheriff Robert Cahill began investigating the curse himself. He developed a rare blood disorder, heart trouble, and was eventually forced to retire. He said, "I never believed in curses until I took the job." The current sheriff's office, it's no longer in Salem and it was moved to Middleton, Massachusetts. They don't say why, but in the old files one note remains, unsigned. The ghost of Giles Corey appears before disaster, and every time he does, someone dies. Before the trials, before the hangings, before the soil turned black with fear, it began with a name. Tituba. She was an enslaved woman, likely from the West Indies, owned by Reverend Samuel Parris. In Puritan records, she was described as other, foreign, pagan, and to the girls of Salem, she was fascinating. She told stories, strange ones, of shadow men, of spirit circles, of ways to protect yourself from evil. She knew about eggs and mirrors, how to tell the future, how to ask questions of the dead. They asked her to show them, and she did. They called it play. But after the fits began, after the screaming and the biting and the clawing at the air, Tituba was the first name they spoke. When questioned, she confessed to witchcraft. She said the devil came to her with a book and asked her to sign. She said she saw other witches too. Names she gave under pressure, beatings, and fear. She said she saw animals change shape, ghosts whispering in trees, a tall man in black who walked without footprints. And then, she spoke of blood. Tituba described things no Puritan child should have heard, let alone imagined. She claimed the devil's book was thick with names, some she recognized. She said it was bound in leather that breathed. When opened, the ink bled. She told the magistrates that the devil had shown her a man with yellow eyes and dogs for hands, that a black creature stood outside her window every night, offering her meat still dripping, and that she had flown through the air, pulled by the force of voices not her own. But the most disturbing detail? She said the girls had already been marked. That one had offered her hair, another, a drop of blood. Tiny rituals they thought were harmless, until the seizures began. Tituba was never hanged. She confessed early, cooperated, and was jailed instead of executed. Eventually, she was sold to another owner. Her name vanished from history, but in Salem folklore she became something else. The first witch, the one who opened the door. Some historians argue she was scapegoated, coerced, broken under fear, but others say she knew what she was doing. Because when they asked her how she learned these things, she didn't say books. She said, "I've always known." There is a tree in Salem that no one touches. It's not marked. It doesn't appear on official maps, but locals know it by feel. Children avoid it. Animals go quiet near it. In spring, it blooms late. In winter, it cracks like it's alive. They say it's where the last of the witches were hanged. Not Gallows Hill, but another, smaller rise near what is now an industrial yard, and they say it bleeds. The tree's bark is darker than it should be. One section at chest height always seems moist, no matter the season. One man, decades ago, tried to cut it down. His chainsaw failed. Then his hands blistered. Then he stopped speaking altogether. He died a year later, claiming he still heard screaming from the woodpile in his yard. They say the tree doesn't just bleed, it listens. Hikers near the site have reported hearing voices, weeping, whispering, chanting, always faint, always behind them, never there when they turn. Local police were once called after a group of teens claimed they saw a figure hanging from one of the limbs, except the rope didn't sway and the figure didn't move. When they approached, the figure was gone. But one of them, a girl, collapsed. When she came to, she was sobbing and screaming a name she didn't recognize, a name from the trial records. Mediums who visit the tree often stop mid-reading. They say the energy is too loud, that the ground is full of mouths. One psychic wrote in her journal, "The tree isn't haunted, it is the haunting." No one has ever built on the land around it. No property lines cross it, and no storm has ever broken its branches. Locals believe it holds something, not a soul, not a ghost, but a memory that bites back, because sometimes curses take root, and sometimes they grow. The most disturbing part of the Salem witch trials wasn't the hysteria, it was the evidence. In 1692, the courts allowed something called spectral evidence, testimony that someone's ghost or spirit had harmed the victim, even if their physical body was nowhere near. It meant you could be hanged for what someone saw in a dream, and people took advantage. Accusers claimed to see women flying, disappearing, turning into birds, cats, black dogs. One said a woman's spirit sat on her chest at night. Another claimed a man transformed into a serpent and coiled around her legs. These were recorded as legal statements, and the judges believed them. But what's less known is what the court didn't say out loud: the animal files. Some of the Salem trial records contain references to animals, not just as symbols or omens, but as witnesses, and sometimes as defendants. In one case, a pig was accused of being possessed. It had allegedly spoken in a human voice. It was killed the next day. Another file mentioned a toad that followed a girl through the village for 3 days. When someone stomped on it, the toad disappeared, and a woman in town suddenly collapsed, coughing up foam. That woman was arrested the same evening. In total, more than a dozen animals were cited as instruments of the devil, including blackbirds, hares, goats, and an especially aggressive yellow dog that could vanish at will. The judges ruled on these sightings as if they were human testimony. If your cow stopped giving milk, it might be witchcraft. If your horse refused to ride near a neighbor's fence, she might be a witch. The absurdity wasn't in the accusations. It was in the convictions, because people didn't laugh at these claims. They died for them. What happened in Salem wasn't law. It was myth turned mortal. And the creatures they feared, familiar spirits, demon animals, shapeshifters, were filed into history as footnotes. But every name in those files once had a face, and every verdict left a ghost. Not all witches in colonial New England were hanged. Some were hunted. The winter of 1679 was brutal. Snowdrifts sealed homes shut. Livestock froze where they stood. Entire towns starved slowly. And that's when the Wendigo stories returned. The Wendigo, a spirit of starvation and winter madness, said to possess humans during famine, said to whisper to them in hunger, said to make them eat each other. In one remote village in western Massachusetts, a woman was found wandering barefoot, her mouth bloody, her hands black with frostbite. She had killed and partially eaten her husband and son. Locals didn't call her insane. They called her a witch. She said something else had made her do it. They burned her body in the woods, not by court order, by community vote. The minister who led the ritual later confessed to nightmares, of a voice that mimicked his own children, of something walking just outside the edge of the firelight. They buried the story along with the snow, but the legend didn't die. Years later, in the same area, another winter famine struck. 3 people went missing. One was found dead, curled beneath a tree, his chest torn open, his heart gone. Locals whispered, "The Wendigo witch has returned." Survivors of that second winter described strange dreams, of smoke without fire, of children gnawing on bones, of something with antlers watching from the trees. Some say the Wendigo is not a spirit but a disease, an infection of the soul, passed down through desperation and hunger. Others say it's a demon, one that comes only when your stomach is truly empty, when your mind turns on your body, when your prayers go unanswered, and you look at the person next to you and think, would they be warm inside me? Modern folklorists trace the legend to native Algonquian beliefs, twisted by Puritan fear and cold. But some records exist. Trial notes, journal entries, a town that struck her name from the census but not from their memory. They called her a witch, but they feared what came through her more. The black shuck is older than Salem. It's a creature of English folklore, an omen, a beast, a hound with flaming red eyes that appears before death. When Puritans crossed the Atlantic, they brought more than religion. They brought their fears, and something followed. Reports of a massive black dog began as early as the 1660s, seen near execution sites, fields where accused witches once lived, always at night, always silent, but the eyes burned. In 1692, several trial documents referenced a dog with fire in its face. One judge scribbled in the margin, "Heard it howl." The shuck wasn't just seen, it was summoned. Through blood rites, cut palms, buried animal hearts, and burnt offerings. Some claimed the witches didn't fly. They ran with the dog. In one case, a man testified he saw a girl walk into the woods with a candle and a dead bird, and return with something following that shook the ground. After the trials ended, the stories didn't. Villagers reported waking to paw prints in the ash around their homes. No other tracks, no sign of entry. Just deep, four-toed impressions, burned black. In 1741, a priest in Essex County wrote in his diary about a funeral where the mourners heard a howl so loud it cracked a church window. They found no animal, but outside, in the frost, were prints, leading to the grave and stopping cold. The black shuck became shorthand for death, for bad luck, for something earned. People began blaming deaths on the dog's shadow. One family buried their livestock after seeing it cross their property. Their youngest child died the next day. Even today, locals in rural Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire still report seeing a shape at the edge of the woods. Too large, too silent, eyes glowing. It's not always violent, but it's never kind. They say you don't hear the black shuck twice, because if you do, it means someone close to you is already gone. Salem isn't a ghost story. It's a wound. One that was never stitched shut. One that never stopped bleeding. They say it was fear, mass hysteria, religious panic. And it was. But it was also something more. Because long after the gallows were torn down and the apologies written, people still whisper. The tree still bleeds. The names still echo. The dogs still howl. And every so often, when the air shifts just right, people still see them. Rebecca Nurse, standing in silence with her hands folded. Giles Corey, crushed under weight we gave him. Tituba, eyes closed, still listening for the next voice who wants to speak with the dead. The trials ended. The haunting didn't. Because they didn't just hang people. They fed something. Something that knows your name when you whisper it near the woods. Something that waits. Something that remembers. This has been Tapes of the Lost. In Salem, the dead don't rest, they walk.
You buried them under verdicts, hung them under oath, silenced them in court. But you never asked, what if they weren't done? Rebecca, Giles, Tituba, good night, mortals.